Every week of the football season, there are lessons to be learned. These are the top 10 lessons I learned in week 11. Let's start with the Chargers passing game. Since week 7, the Chargers are 6th in pass rate over expectation, and over that time, Justin Herbert is a QB7 in fantasy points per game. But more surprisingly is the fact that he has 97 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown over the last 2 games. He's kind of becoming a dual threat QB here, and I think he's becoming a guy you almost have to start in your 1 QB leagues. But let's also look at the wide receivers, Ladd McConkey and Quentin Johnston. Over that same stretch, they are the wide receiver 14 and 15 respectively in PPR leagues. And this week, they get the Baltimore Ravens. This is a great matchup. I think you got to fire up Justin Herbert. I think you got to fire up Ladd McConkey. I think you got to fire up Quentin Johnston. Get these guys in your lineup this week and also probably rest the season if this is a Chargers offense we're going to see going forward. And then we got to talk about the Bengals passing attack. And look, I feel terrible for Joe Burrow right now. This guy is playing maybe the best of any quarterback in the NFL. Absolutely playing at an MVP level right now. Leads the league in passing yards. Leads the league in passing touchdowns. Only has 4 interceptions on the season. And somehow his team is 4-7. This makes absolutely no sense. But look, for fantasy, we don't care about wins and losses unless you're a Bengals fan, of course. Joe Burrow, the QB2 on the season right now. This guy is looking like not only a potential MVP candidate in real life, but an MVP candidate for your fantasy team as well. And same thing with Ja'Marr Chase, having a career year this year, potentially going to have the best season of his entire career, probably going to finish as the overall wide receiver 1. But don't sleep on T. Higgins either. I know it's been frustrating because this guy misses games and every time he's hurt, people are like, he just doesn't want to play. But when he's been out there, he has been great. He's the wide receiver 8 in terms of fantasy points per game in the games that he has actually played this year. And he's been better than Ja'Marr Chase in many of those games. And it's also helped running back Chase Brown with all those checkdowns in the receiving game. Like, the Bengals may not win the Super Bowl this year. They may not even make the playoffs. But the Bengals offense might carry your teams to fantasy championships. And if you get value or entertainment out of the work that we do here at Fantasy Endgame, do me a quick favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, greatly appreciate it. Another offense that looks like it might carry teams to fantasy championships this year and also may potentially win the Super Bowl are the Detroit Lions. And what's so great about the Detroit Lions, we know about the running game with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, the offensive line, the touchdowns they get almost every week, it seems like. But I love the passing game here too, because it doesn't matter what the game script is like. It doesn't matter how much they're up by. Dan Campbell will not take the foot off the gas here. We saw it this week. They were destroying the Jaguars. I mean, they had scored 3 rushing touchdowns. They were already killing them. And what ended up happening? Jared Goff still threw for 400 yards and 3 touchdowns. Amon-Ra had a huge day. Jameson Williams had a huge day. We often get questions, people worried like, I feel like they're going to be blowing them out at halftime and then they're going to stop throwing the ball. You don't have to worry about that with the Detroit Lions. They don't stop playing until it's absolutely necessary to stop playing. This offense is a fantasy gold mine this year. If you got any of these guys or multiple of these guys in fantasy, you should be feeling good. They're likely going to help you win a championship as well. Let's keep that league winner theme going with tight end Brock Bowers. Look, tight end has mostly been mediocre this year, as it usually is, but Brock Bowers has been great. Currently the number 1 tight end, currently leads all tight ends in targets, receptions, and yards, and he's actually on pace to have 119 receptions and 1,200 receiving yards. Remember last year, Puka Nacua set the record for receptions by a rookie with 105. He is on pace to smash that, and he's a tight end. Now, the only downside here for Brock Bowers is touchdowns, because he's in the Raiders offense. But with this kind of usage at this position, it doesn't matter. Brock Bowers is a locked-in, no doubt tight end rest of the season, potential league-winning tight end rest of the season. If you've got Brock Bowers, hold on to him tight. Ride him rest of the way. He should be great. And another thing you should definitely do this fantasy season is try out Pick'ems on Underdog Fantasy if you haven't yet. It's another great, fun way to get your fantasy fix on. And if you're new to Underdog Fantasy, they're going to give you this Jameis Winston new customer special. He just needs to get 1 yard on Thursday Night Football. You win that pick right away. Just make sure you join using promo code ENDGAME, because not only will that get you that new customer special, but also up to $1,000 in bonus cash. And I'm just going to continue with the league winning theme because I think Breece Hall might finally be ready to be a league winner in fantasy football this year and pay off that top 5 pick if you drafted him as a top 5 player. We saw the kind of usage we want to see from Breece Hall in week 11. 17 carries, more importantly, 7 catches in this game, 121 total yards, 2 touchdowns. Now, it didn't help the Jets get the win, but we don't care about wins for fantasy, right? Unless you're a Jets fan, of course. We care about fantasy points, and Breece Hall, if he's going to get this kind of usage, is going to rack up a ton of fantasy points the rest of the season, because listen to his schedule when they come out of the Week 12 bye. He gets the Seahawks, the Dolphins, the Jaguars, the Rams, the Bills. Those are all fantastic matchups for a running back. Bottom 10 defenses against the run. Breece Hall has the potential to absolutely go nuclear the rest of the season. If you bought low on Breece Hall, or if you've just been holding Breece Hall and you're still alive in your fantasy league, you potentially have a league winner on your hands. We also got to talk about the Bears passing attack. Coming out of the bye with new OC Thomas Brown, we saw a completely different Bears offense in Week 11, and it was great for fantasy. They used pre-snap motion 66% of the time in Week 11. That number was only 37% in Shane Waldron's static offense. They also had a 52% success rate in Week 11. The highest success rate they had in any game this year with Shane Waldron was only 41%. They also didn't have a single 3-and-out for the first time all year in Week 11. This was obviously great for Caleb Williams. I'm going to now put Caleb Williams in a very solid starter in a 2QB Superflex league. Not ready to say you have to start him in a 1QB league yet, but he will be streamable in very plus matchups. Also for the wide receivers here, this was good for all the wide receivers. The Bears had 3 wide receivers on the field 83% of the times, which means all these guys got involved. DJ Moore, 7 targets, 7 catches, 62 yards. He looks like a solid weekly start going forward, but Rome Odunze actually led the team with 10 targets. Now he only had 6 catches for 65 yards, but still, he's also looking like a solid start going forward. And Keenan Allen, he did have 8 targets, only 4 catches for 41 yards. But if he's going to be out there over 80% of the time, which it looks like he's going to be, he's at least worth flex consideration. So I think it's time we buy back into this Bears passing attack. And who is the actual wide receiver 1 in San Francisco? Well, if you've been listening to me the last 2 weeks, I've been saying it's Jauan Jennings. And now I'm telling you for sure, no doubt about it, it is Jauan Jennings. I've said the last 2 weeks, he's a strong start. You got to get him in your lineups. And he's come through with 2 very good fantasy games in a row. And when you look at him against Deebo Samuel in this offense, he is head and shoulders above Deebo Samuel. Over the last 2 weeks, Jennings is the wide receiver 9, averaging 20.1 fantasy points per game, but he also has an incredibly strong 41.3 first read percentage, which is one of the highest in the entire NFL over the last 2 weeks. Deebo is only at 23.9%. He also has 21 targets, while Deebo only has 13. Jennings is clearly the number 1 wide receiver in here. He's the guy Brock Purdy looks to when he needs like that third down, when he needs a big play. Jennings is the guy he is looking to, and that is not going to change. He is in that Brandon Ayuk role. Jauan Jennings is absolutely ready to help win fantasy championships, and Jauan Jennings likely going to be the number 1 best waiver wire pickup of the entire 2024 season, assuming he stays healthy. And I don't want to overreact to one game, but I'm starting to buy back into Anthony Richardson as a quarterback in a 1QB league. Now, I'm not there yet, but I think he's now becoming a solid start in your 2QB Superflex leagues. What I really love to see in Week 11 after getting benched for Joe Flacco for reasons that made absolutely no sense, he came out, he had a strong game, led the Colts to a win, but more importantly for fantasy, 32 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. And this wasn't just like a one-time thing. You look at the 2 games prior, he had 45 and 56 rushing yards. That rushing upside, that is what we really need with Anthony Richardson, has started to come along as the season has gone on. If that is going to continue, he's at least going to be a solid start in your 2QB Superflex leagues with streaming potential in 1QB leagues. But if this continues and he gets better as the season goes on, we could see the Anthony Richardson we hoped we were going to see all year long. So if for some reason he was dropped out there on your waiver wire, I think he's at least worth picking up to see if this continues, because they have to roll with this guy rest of the season. And are we finally seeing the year 2 JSN breakout? After that big game, before the team's bye with DK Metcalf out, I was like, okay, that was with no DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf's back. It's the 49ers. He's just going to go back to being okay for fantasy. Nope. I was completely wrong on JSN. Had a monster game in this game. Actually out-targeted DK Metcalf 11-9. Although I will say DK Metcalf still led in first read percentage 35-30. But a 30% first read percentage is still a very strong first read percentage. And it's starting to look like this is a 2-man show in Seattle. DK Metcalf, JSN, with Tyler Lockett predictably being the odd man out here. Now, Metcalf's certainly still the number 1 guy and the guy I think you want in fantasy rest of the season, but JSN, if he's going to continue to get this kind of involvement and this kind of usage, has to at least be considered a solid start with upside going forward. And then finally, I want to talk about the Dolphins offense. Last year, the Dolphins offense was one of those fantasy gold mines that helped you win fantasy championships. This year hasn't been that way, even with Tua returning, but I think we saw flashes of that in week 11. Hopefully we can get this the rest of the season. We finally saw Tyreek Hill have a semi-big game. I mean, a nice game, 7 catches, 61 yards, and a touchdown. You'll take that, I guess. You want more upside, but you'll at least take it. At least there's signs of life here. Jauan Smith went absolutely nuts, and look, over the last 3 weeks, Jauan Smith is a tight end 5 in fantasy and has the 8th most targets. Now, of course, a big part of that is because he had a huge week 11 game, but I think Jauan Smith is becoming a set and forget at the tight end position. And then, of course, De'Von Achane looks like the absolute workhorse here when Tua is healthy. Had 21 opportunities in week 11. Keeps getting a ton of targets. He's an absolute cheat code at fantasy the rest of the season. But, of course, it's not good for everybody in this offense. Raheem Mostert, Jalen Waddle, 2 guys who were, fantasy relevant, fantasy solid last year. They are looking like the odd mans out here. These guys look like they're going to be complete busts in 2024. But hopefully for those other guys, Tyreek Hill, Jauan Smith, De'Von Achane, we're at least going to see a Miami offense that can support them as being fantasy studs the rest of the season. And let Fantasy Endgame support you this week in your fantasy matchups. Everything you need to win, start, sit, booms, waiver wire, we got you covered. It's all in our Week 12 playlist right here.